Hi again, everybody. I'm going to be talking to you again today about Sophocles' 5th century tragedy, Oedipus the King, which we are presenting or approaching, as you guys know, as a tragedy that is, in effect, about the experience or the problem of getting it, figuring something out, understanding something. Um, Last time we were doing a general introduction to this part of our course and learning about the myth of Oedipus that Sophocles' play retells. And I was emphasizing what I take to be a very basic but also very important point, that this story that the ancient Athenian audience is watching in Sophocles' play, it is not only familiar to them, it is exceedingly familiar to them. They know it up and down, backwards and forwards, so to speak. Um, Now, what gets found out or figured out or understood in the end in this play is, of course, overall and ultimately, it's Oedipus's destiny, his fate, his terrible, uniquely terrible realization that he has fulfilled this prophecy that was told about him, that he was going to kill his father and marry his mother. But that, of course, is not where we start with this play. And as I was saying a little bit last time, one of the interesting things in terms of Sophocles' artistic choices is where he starts the story. We start the story of Oedipus in this play late in the game, so to speak. We start with Oedipus secure in his position as king of Thebes, but there's a problem, which is this plague that has visited the city. So that situation, plague in Thebes, that problem at the beginning of the play, that is what is presented right away as what needs to be figured out. Plague in Thebes, that's what needs to be analyzed, interpreted, and as we may say, without too much of a kind of metaphorical extension, we can say that the plague in Thebes is the text, if you like, at the beginning of the play that Oedipus needs to read, of which Oedipus needs to make some sense. Again, that's a broad, but I think not only a justifiable but a useful extension of our term or category text, because it really just means our relationship to any data that the world throws at us and from which we try to extract information. So that's what we're watching, we, the audience of Oedipus the King, from the very beginning of the play. Oedipus presented with this problem of plague in Thebes as a text that he needs to figure out. Now, in the last lecture, I was introducing how Oedipus proceeds, basically. How does he set about trying to read, interpret, figure out this text? And of course, he follows, has already followed actually, when the play opens, a strategy, a reading strategy, if we want to put it in a kind of trivializing almost way. But Oedipus pursues a strategy which is a very familiar and, as it were, a predictable one in ancient Greek culture. He has consulted the oracle. And I was talking a bit last time, as I hope you guys will recall, about this system, really, or network of oracles that dotted the ancient Greek world. These are temples in which you find a priest or priestess who is supposed to be able to communicate with the god whose temple it is. So you can actually travel there physically to the temple, ask a question about your life, and get an answer back. Oedipus has sent his question about plague in Thebes to the oracle that was generally recognized in ancient times as the greatest of them all. That's the great oracle of the god Apollo at Delphi. And again, this is totally characteristic of ancient Greek culture. That's what you do in ancient times. If you have a serious problem, you ask the oracle, assuming, of course, that you can afford to do that, because asking the oracle not only involves travel, a journey to perhaps a quite distant place from where you are, it also involves money. You have to bring gifts, offerings to the temple in order to be able to ask the oracle and receive an answer. Now, a little bit more about oracles, a little bit that is, I think, on point and important for us. Oracles, they would give an answer, to be sure, but at least in the tradition that has come down to us, the answers that oracles gave were, if not always, very typically ambiguous, and sometimes even elliptical. In other words, very hard to understand at all. But let's just stick with the idea of ambiguity as a very typical characteristic of oracular advice in ancient times. And I shared on our Canvas page as a handout just one tiny example, but it's a very famous one of oracular ambiguity. It's from the ancient Greek historian Herodotus in his long account of the Greco-Persian Wars. It's a little story early in Herodotus about a guy called Croesus, king of the Medes, M-E-D-S. In this part of Herodotus' story, which I'm not going to read, I'm just going to summarize. In this part of Herodotus' story, Croesus, the king of the Medes, who's very rich, is trying to decide whether he should attack the Persian Empire. Okay, so he sends an oracle to Delphi. He asks, should I make war on the Persians? The oracle answers in so many words, if you attack the Persians, a great empire will be lost. If you attack the Persians, a great empire will be lost. Croesus thinks, great, I'm going to defeat the Persians. He duly attacks them, but of course it turns out that his is the empire that is lost. So that's a very nice little example, and a famous one, of the ambiguity of the answers that you can get from oracles. However, the Greeks don't really seem to have minded that. As I was saying last time, they have, or had, seemingly tremendous faith in the advice they were capable of receiving from these oracles. And that network of temples dotted around the Eastern Mediterranean with oracles in them, we can think of that as a sacred system, to be sure, because those temples are focal points of the ancient Greek religion. But I would also like us to think of that as an informational system, okay, or network. That's where the Greeks would go, so to speak, to get their ideas. That's where they would go to get answers to their problems and chart their way forward in life, again, if they could afford to do so. That network of oracles, that for the Greeks was where the answers were. You could go there and ask and get back any kind of information that you needed. And so I want to emphasize not only the idea of those oracles as a kind of informational system or network, but I also, and I think even more basically, want to emphasize the kind of, let's say, movement that is described when Oedipus or anybody else sends to the oracle. So I've been suggesting that we can see that plague in Thebes at the beginning of this play. We can see that plague in Thebes as, so to speak, a kind of text with which Oedipus is confronted. Okay? That's on the page before him. This difficult problem, this thing that needs to be figured out. Oedipus's strategy, and this is the very basic point that I want to emphasize, Oedipus's strategy for reading, for interpreting, for trying to understand that text that is on the page before him, Plague in Thebes, his strategy actually is to turn away from the text, right? To look away from the text, far away, in fact, sending messengers all the way to the oracle at Delphi, asking the oracle how to understand the text that is before him. So Oedipus is going from his problem to an external authority, the authority of the oracle, which is presumed to have the answer more or less by definition, because the oracles are supposed to have all the answers. That's how the Greeks think about it. As I've been saying, the Greeks had tremendous faith in their informational network, that network of oracles. Probably any society, let's generalize like crazy, okay? Probably any society is going to have some conception of where the answers are, what its informational network or system looks like. And probably any society is going to have tremendous faith in that informational system. Certainly, our society today has very tremendous faith in the informational system that we have projected and constructed over the last 20 years. When we have something on the page in front of us, a difficult, problematic, obscure text, our immediate impulse is, again, to turn away from the text, to go online to find the answers to our problems. So we say, "Hey Siri, why is there plague in Thebes?" Oedipus, says, "Hey Apollo," and it works in much the same way. The point that I want to make here, the point that I'm trying to make, is not that the oracles are like the internet. Not really. That's obviously an exceedingly crude analogy. Nonetheless, the point that I do want to emphasize and underline is, again, this interpretative movement that Oedipus pursues, away from the text before him, turning away, far away, to an external authority that is assumed to understand the text by definition, just because the oracle has all the answers. Now, in this case, very interestingly, the oracle, in a sense, refuses to help. And I suspect that for the ancient Greek audience, that may actually be where this play starts to get really upsetting. You're supposed to be able to ask the oracle and get an answer for your problem. Oedipus asks the oracle, and in a sense he gets no answer at all. Creon comes back from the oracle to report, look, the oracle says it's about the murder of Laius, and he's here. That murderer is here somewhere. And in that final kind of poetic version that Creon gives at line 110, this is where I ended the last lecture. Creon reports that the oracle says, "The guilt is in this land," here in Thebes. "That which is sought can be found. The unheeded thing escapes." As I was saying, typically, oracles in the ancient world gave ambiguous answers. This one has actually given quite a clear answer, I think, quite a straightforward answer, but precisely as clear and straightforward, it's a very unhelpful answer to Oedipus's question. Oedipus has asked, why is there plague in Thebes and what can we do about it? The oracle comes back and says, okay, it has to do with the murder of Laius, but the oracle also says, it's right in front of you. That which is sought can be found. The unheeded thing escapes. In other words, you're asking me, the oracle, for the answer? No, you figure it out. The oracle actually turns Oedipus, more or less unwillingly, back to the problem on the page before him and tells him to do his own interpretative work, tells him to look, as it were, for some of those telling details, what makes the text before him strange, but by that token also capable of being interpreted, capable of being figured out. And so Oedipus starts making inquiries, and now I'm on line 114 of our text in our edition. Oedipus says, so, okay, was it at home or in the countryside that death came to Laius, or traveling abroad? Creon says he left, he set himself upon an embassy, but never returned after he set out from home. Oedipus, was there no messenger, no fellow traveler who saw what happened? Such a one might tell something of use. Creon says they were all killed save one. He fled in terror, and he could tell us nothing in clear terms of what he knew, except for one thing only. So immediately on receiving the oracle, that oracle turning him back to the page, as I've said, Oedipus starts to ask questions. And, you know, we might ask him, how long have you been king of Thebes? In In other parts of the Oedipus story, we learn that he and Jocasta have at least adolescent children. So he's been around for a long time. He came to the city, Thebes, in the story. He came to the city immediately after its old king had kind of gone away, and not long after he, Oedipus, had killed an old man on the road. There are, I think, some bits of the poem, so to speak, that are offering themselves to be joined up interpretatively there, and Oedipus has been there for a long time. He's only starting, seemingly, to ask questions now. That's, we've talked a lot, I've talked a lot in this course already about the concept, the phenomenon, the strangeness of noticing, of seeing what is questionable. Oedipus seemingly is very, very good at failing to notice, at failing to see anything odd or strange going on. And I just want to turn on that note to the long speech that Oedipus gives. It's on page 82, 83 in our course edition. I'm going to pick it up from line 246. This is where Oedipus makes a kind of proclamation about the murderer of Laius and curses the murderer of Laius. At line 246, he says, "Upon the murderer I invoke this curse. Whether he is one man and all unknown, or one of many, may he wear out his life in misery to miserable doom. If with my knowledge he lives at my hearth, I pray that I myself may feel my curse. On you I lay my charge to fulfill all this for me, for the God, and for this land of ours." He's speaking to the people of Thebes there. "Destroyed and blighted by the gods forsaken. Even were this no matter of God's ordinance, it did not fit you so to leave it lie unpurified. Since a great man is dead, a king, indeed, you should have searched it out," he says to his countrymen. "Since I am now the holder of his office, and have his bed and wife that once was his, and had his line not been unfortunate, we would have children in common, but fortune leapt upon his head. Because of all these things," Oedipus says, "I fight in his defense," in Laius' defense, "I fight in his defense as for my father." And we, and the audience in Athens, we hear Oedipus pronouncing those lines about sharing Laius' bed, his wife, fighting for Laius as though Laius were his father. We know Laius was his father. We know who Jocasta is, and we go, ugh, we squirm, right, with discomfort. What is making us squirm, what is providing that kind of tragic thrill and discomfort there, is, of course, the gap between what we know at this point and what Oedipus does not. And we hear what he is failing to notice, even though his own speech is sort of pointing fingers at the salient details of his story and of his fate. So I'm talking about Oedipus at this early stage of the play as being represented to us by Sophocles as not only being really, really good at failing to notice, failing to see what is questionable, but even willfully persisting in that failure, stubbornly refusing to try to see. And along those lines, let's pursue a little farther Oedipus's interpretative strategy. What does he do now to try to figure out the problem of plague in Thebes? He's received this oracle back, which has told him it has to do with Laius, but has also basically said to him, you figure it out. Oedipus, however, again turns to external authority. So if we pick this up from line 276 of our text, Oedipus has an exchange here with the leader of the chorus, and I want to talk in a minute about what the chorus is in an ancient Greek tragedy. The chorus leader at line 276 says to Oedipus, "As you have held me to my oath, I speak. I neither killed the king nor can declare the killer. But Since Phoebus set the quest, it is his part to tell us who has done it. Oedipus says, right, but to put compulsion on the gods against their will, no man can do that. You hear them complaining about the oracle that they got back. Apollo's supposed to give us the answers, darn it. Oedipus is like, yeah, well, what are we going to do? If he doesn't want to tell, we can't make him. Chorus leader says, may I then say what I think second best? Oedipus, if there's a third best too, spare not to tell it. The chorus leader says, I know that what the Lord Teiresias sees is most often what the Lord Apollo sees. If you should inquire of this from him, you might find out most clearly. Oedipus answers, even in this my actions have not been slow. On Creon's word I have sent 2 messengers, and why the prophet is not here already I have been wondering. And I'm going to pause there. We've been talking in this lecture and the previous one about the system of oracles in the ancient Greek world. I've been suggesting that's both a sacred and an informational system where they went to get the answers to their problems. They also had, at least in Greek literature, it's represented to us this way, a secondary, kind of backup system, both sacred and informational. A system focused not on the figure of the oracle, but rather on the figure of the prophet. The wise man or woman who is able to see the future and deploy special insight of various kinds. And prophecy, again, in the ancient Greek world, that's something they certainly believe in. They believe there are people who can tell the future. That they believe there are people who are specially gifted to see fate and to advise accordingly. And prophets would usually interpret fate through means of various kinds of sacrificial or magical procedures. One that gets referred to several times in our play is the observing of birds, observation of bird flight, and you would be able to supposedly divine the future or see into fate by that means. Anyway, Teiresias is, as it were, the local prophet. And what's happening in this exchange between Oedipus and the chorus leader is they're saying, gee, the oracle really let us down. Huh, that sucks. What do we do? Oh, I know, let's ask Teiresias. And the point that I'm trying to make is that it is actually a reiteration, a repetition of the interpretative movement that Oedipus made at the get-go. The problem is there, plague in Thebes. That's the text before you. Ask the oracle. The oracle comes back. It's not that helpful. It says, read the text before you. Oedipus's next move is ask Teiresias. It's again a movement away from the text to an external authority that is presumed by definition to have the answers to the text because he's supposed to have all the answers anyway. So we're telling a little story, I guess, of reading from early in Oedipus the king. And in this little story so far, Oedipus is not performing very well and not learning, as it were. He keeps doing this movement away from the text to find external authority, as though unable to read the data that is before him. At the same time, though, this external authority is much closer to hand. The idea is that Teiresias is sort of the local Thebes prophet. So first time around, Oedipus sends all the way to Delphi, hundreds of miles away. This time he just sends messengers to Teiresias, who's kind of just like the old man down the road. So we still have this movement away, but it's a much nearer movement. It's as though that circle of information is collapsing on Oedipus, and he soon will be confronted with the necessity to try to read the text itself. Now at this point, we come to what is the first kind of crisis, let's say, in Oedipus the king. And I want to note and underline as clearly as I can that it is very likely that our experience of reading this text up to this point is one of being a little bit bored or a little bit underwhelmed, okay? And I mention that in part because I want to make very clear that If you're feeling a little bored or underwhelmed by the text, don't worry about that. You're not doing anything wrong. This is not the kind of text that we are accustomed to reading, and that has to do in part with formal aspects of the ancient Greek theater, which I may talk about at another time. So there hasn't been a lot of action, right? What happens in Oedipus the King so far? People stand on stage, other people come on, talk to them a bit, go off stage. It's wordy, it's formal, it's maybe a bit stilted. There's not a lot happening. What happens now is something, let's say, when Teiresias comes on, and I'm just trying to draw a circle around this, so to speak, because I want us to be clear that we notice that this is what Sophocles cares about. This, I think, is what the Greek audience cares about. This is where the action of the play, so to speak, begins, even though it remains a very, let's say, static, physically static kind of action. Teiresias comes on. I'm now at line 300, and Oedipus addresses him in a longish speech, saying, Teiresias, you are versed in everything, things teachable and things not to be spoken, things of the heaven and earth creeping things. You have no eyes, but in your mind you know with what a plague our city is afflicted. Teiresias is blind, physically blind, but in an ancient kind of ironic metaphor, his physical blindness stands as a symbol of his ability to see into the heart of things. You have no eyes, but in your mind you know with what a plague our city is afflicted. My lord, in you alone we find a champion, in you alone one that can rescue us. Perhaps you have not heard the messengers, but Phoebus sent in answer to our sending an oracle declaring that our freedom from this disease would only come when we should learn the names of those who killed King Elias and kill them or expel them from our country. Do not begrudge us messages from birds or any other way of prophecy within your skill. Save yourself and the city. Save me. Save all of us from this pollution that lies on us because of that dead man. We are in your hands. It's a man's most noble labor to help another when he has the means and power. Teiresias answers, alas, how terrible is wisdom when it brings no profit to the man that's wise. This I knew well, but had forgotten it, else I would not have come here. What just happened in Oedipus the King? What did we just watch? Well, we just watched Teiresias getting it. We watched him shuffle on stage, come and stand before Oedipus, look at him with his blind eyes, and say, I knew this well, but I had forgotten it, else I would not have come here. He has seen in that instant who Oedipus is, what Oedipus has done. And in that instant of seeing and knowing the truth, Teiresias wishes and expresses the wish that he had not seen and known the truth. It certainly would not be correct, I think, to suppose that Sophocles is offering us in that moment any kind of interpretative technique. I mean, for one thing, Teiresias is a prophet. This is what he does. He has insight. He sees into things. And also, it's worth noting that Teiresias doesn't actually do anything to get to that moment of seeing. He doesn't, perform any sacrifices or anything like that. He just comes on, looks at Oedipus, boom, he sees the truth. What Sophocles, I think, cares about, and what he has put on stage, and what he has allowed us to look at, is just precisely that moment of knowing, just precisely that moment of getting it, just precisely that unstoppable, thrilling, and also wonderful, and also terrible moment when Teiresias sees Oedipus and he goes, oh, that's what just happened. And there's a very, very, I think, crucial element in that moment of getting it, that Teiresias kind of illuminates in the little exchange he has there, which I just read with Oedipus. It's when he says, I knew this. In other words, I knew that you had done it. I knew, of course it was you. Oedipus, oh my God, you killed your father and Jocasta as your mom. Ah, I knew that, but I'd forgotten. And if I hadn't forgotten, there's no way I would have come here, because God damn it, you made me know that again. He is saying to Oedipus in that moment. And I'm not going to lie to you, we're on very, very difficult, I think, territory here, intellectual territory, I mean. And it's very difficult to unpack this fully, but I think we can unpack it at least a little bit. Sophocles is reminding us, let's say, that in the experience of getting it, the experience that we all have, just as a normal part of our mental lives, in the experience of getting it, there is very often, if not always, a strong kind of retrospective element. So when we finally find Waldo, to use a dreadfully trivial example, I apologize for that one. When we finally see where the puzzle piece goes, or when we finally understand that equation that has been driving us crazy for days or weeks, or when we finally feel like we have seen the element of a poem that helps us to understand it, we go, and another part of what happens to us in that situation, I think, is we go, I can't believe I didn't see that before, right? It's as though, I think, it's as though in that moment we do remember something that we had forgotten, and we cast a kind of look back at our previous selves that had not yet gotten what we just got. The is also of course, or I can't believe I didn't see that before. An element of déjà vu, seeing again in that. Very familiar, but I think very profound experience of coming to the understanding of something. And when Teiresias comes on stage, when he has his moment of getting it, it's not the case that he sees something new when he looks at Oedipus. It's much more that he sees in a new way what was there all along, or perhaps sees that he has already seen what was there all along. And if we want to give a name, a kind of pseudo or quasi-technical name, to the moment of understanding articulated in that way, the kind of thing that happens to Teiresias in that moment of our play, we can call that recognition. Recognition, an ordinary word, which literally means knowing again, recognition. And remember, I want to connect this point, which, and again, it is a difficult theoretical point, but I think it's completely intelligible. I want to connect this point about recognition back to the whole experience, especially for the ancient Greek audience, of watching Oedipus the king. Remember, they know this story, absolutely familiar to them. When you go to see Oedipus the king in the ancient Greek world, you're not going to see what happens, not at all. Rather, you're going to watch what has to happen, happen. And when what has to happen happens, the experience that follows, I think, is supposed to be an experience of recognition, the kind of thing that we've just watched happening to Teiresias at this point in the play. It's like listening for a part of the music that you know is coming because you've heard it before, but when it comes you go, ah, yes, there it is. It's like getting a meal that we have ordered and we have been anticipating, and we know we are getting that hamburger and fries, but when it finally starts to come across the floor to us in the hands of the server and arrives on our table, we go, yes, there it is. It's a little bit like, in the same way, watching a goal that we see emerge from a game. So let's say you're watching a soccer game. There's a lot of action around the net, a lot of passes, a lot of chances. You see the team trying to generate that goal, and then, they get it. There it is. It has to happen. You watch it happen. That's what happens to Teiresias in this moment. It had to happen that he would see again, recognize what and who Oedipus is. And it has to happen for us, the audience, that we watch him have that experience of recognition. And just before I move off this point and on to one concluding point for this lecture, I just want to emphasize again something that is obvious and yet very strange and profound, and that is that any performative art, be it a musical performance or a comic routine, or in this case, a play, any performative art fundamentally involves repetition, right? The performers are putting that play on night after night after night. They're having the same experience over and over again. And we, of course, can go see that play night after night after night. And there are plays and other kinds of performances that we do go see again and again and again. You know, maybe you don't go see, I mean, my kids do, but maybe you don't go see the latest Marvel movie umpteen times. But, you know, if you've seen Hamlet, let's say, and somebody comes to you with tickets for Hamlet, says, hey, there's this new production of Hamlet, let's go see it. You don't typically say, Hamlet, seen it, you know. Or if they're putting on Beethoven's Fifth Symphony at the Orpheum and you have that on Spotify, you don't say, heard it. No. You can go to have that experience with that performative art again and again and again, even though you know what happens. And since you know what happens, it has to happen, that's what you go watch. And I'll come back to these points in the next lecture as well. For this one, I want to wrap up on a potentially very strange and off-putting aspect of the play and of the Greek theater, which is relevant to what we're talking about. It's the role of the chorus, whom we see, for example, we get the first long passage involving the chorus beginning at line 151 of our text. That's after this initial scene of the crowd of Thebans appealing to Oedipus. After the oracle comes on, the actors actually exit, and we get the chorus singing. And the chorus is a kind of call and response aspect of the ancient Greek tragedy. And it was sung, although as far as I know, we don't know the music to which it would have been sung. But the chorus says, what is the sweet-spoken word of God from the shrine of Pytho, rich in gold that has come to glorious Thebes? I am stretched on the rack of doubt, and terror and trembling hold my heart, O Delian healer. And I worship full of fears for what doom you will bring to pass, new or renewed in the revolving years. Speak to me, immortal voice, child of golden hope. The other part of the chorus, which is called the antistrophe, answers. First I call on you, Athena, deathless daughter of Zeus, and Artemis, earth upholder, who sits in the midst of the marketplace in the throne which men call fame. And Phoebus, the far shooter, three averters of fate, come to us now, if ever before, when ruin rushed upon the state, etc., etc. And it goes on for quite a bit longer, this call and response between the different parts of the chorus on stage, as they kind of dwell within, augment, illuminate the bit of the action that we just saw, which was the oracle coming back from Apollo. what the heck is the chorus? Well, the chorus is meant in ancient Greek tragedy as a kind of representation of the audience on stage, okay? And we need to know just very briefly a little tiny bit about how important the theater was to classical Athenian society and culture, and what kind of importance it held. Plays in the ancient Greek context, they are quite far removed from anything that we would call entertainment, okay? They form part of a religious festival, a festival honoring the god Dionysus, and they were performed once a year in a long cycle of plays in a purpose-built theater on the site of the Acropolis in Athens. And if you visit Athens, you can visit the reconstructed theater of Dionysus, and I put a picture of it on our Canvas page. So it's an annual religious festival where these tragedies are put on, and in effect, the whole city, at least the whole non-slave city, the whole city would attend these productions. And although there's some comedy at the end of the day, basically what you do if you're an ancient Athenian during this festival of Dionysus, you go to the theater and you watch tragedies. You watch tragedies, and you are, if the tragedy is good, you are shattered by the experience of watching that tragedy. And we'll talk next time with a little help from Aristotle about why that's a thing and how that is supposed to work. The chorus, in any case, is a crucial element of an Athenian tragedy, and as I was saying a moment ago, the chorus represents the audience on stage. The whole city, almost, is in that theater watching Oedipus the King. The chorus in Oedipus the King, in the play itself, represents or stands for the citizenry in the seats. So, as I've said now, probably enough times that it's making you guys roll your eyes, justly. As I've said now a number of times, the experience of watching Oedipus the King, which the ancient Athenian audience has almost certainly already seen, about a story that they know upside down, backwards, and forwards, that's an experience of watching what has to happen happen. That's an experience of recognition like the one that Teiresias has when he first sees Oedipus. But it goes farther than that. We, the audience of this play, are watching what has to happen happen, but we're also in the play as the chorus, right? Watching what happens in the play. So we're also watching ourselves, watching what has to happen happen. It is a maddening, let's say, circle of recognition. And if in reading this text we find ourselves going, what is the point of this? And again, I would not suggest that's an incorrect reaction. When we first come to Greek tragedy, that is exactly our reaction. What the heck is going on here? What is the point of this? That experience of recognition and that contemplation of recognition, that is the point of this tragedy. We watch it happen, that experience, recognition, even as we also are engaged in, and as it were, imprisoned within that experience of recognition. Okay, we haven't gotten very far into Oedipus the King. We'll get quite a bit farther next time. As I've said, we're going to get a little help from our friend Aristotle for the next lecture, and I've put an excerpt from his Poetics on the Canvas page. Don't worry, it's very, very brief. but he's going to help us to talk a bit more about the concept of recognition as it is deployed in the ancient Greek theater, and also about why that was a thing, as I banally put it a few moments ago. What's the point of this experience for the ancient Greeks? And we'll talk about that next time. Okay, thank you very much as always for your attention. Bye-bye.